Trying to get props here in the Slack, and there we go. And it should just be a mouth click.
Okay, Nick, if Nick is here, he can help when, right? Yeah, okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Brook Wilke. I'm at Michigan State University, and it's exciting to be here with all of you. I know many of you, but not everybody. So excited to share the message of what we've been doing at Michigan State. And I really appreciated Kevin's presentation yesterday. Kevin, are you here this morning? Yeah, Kevin's back there. Kevin kind of set the stage really well for the type of work we do, or at least I'm involved in Michigan, with mostly with winter barley and thinking about how do we make this crop work in our systems throughout the Midwest. And so I'm probably going to have ultimately the only talk that's really not about barley, it's about other crops, but it's really in the context of barley. So I wanted to kick this off thinking about why don't farmers in the Midwest grow barley anymore? Like that's really like when I started doing this research, like we should grow barley. Wait, why doesn't anybody really? I mean, a significant footprint grow barley. And we could debate about like the malt quality, we could debate about yields or markets and so forth. But ultimately, what I come down to is that they can't make enough money, right? There's other ways to make more money in some years, right? Corn and soybeans have a really strong foothold. They're incredibly good at what they do. And so it's hard for barley to make an entry point because it doesn't make enough money. That said, Kevin pointed out all the reasons why barley, especially winter barley, should be a component of our Midwestern cropping systems. Sustainability reasons. I work a lot on agroecology and sustainability topics as part of my LTAR, long-term agroecosystem research role. And so where this is going to land is that barley is the crop that gives us a real opportunity to double crop. And so that second crop may be a part of the gateway into making winter cereals more prominent in the Midwest because we can make some more money, hopefully. I'll show you what we've learned over the years and kind of give you a picture of, well, is that true or not? Can we do this? I don't have all the answers yet. Okay, there we go.
I think you can X out that gray box at the bottom there.
Okay, so last year, or basically in 2022, the RMA and the federal government said, we need to grow more, right? Come on, US, we need to grow more, and that includes double cropping. And so there was this push to incentivize double cropping in areas of the US that hadn't really been thought of too much yet. And it's a little bit of a stretch of the boundaries of what we know and think we can do, but there's a lot of press about it, and farmers have new opportunities. Well, maybe the buttons will work. Okay, there we go. So in 2023, essentially, we had all of these green and yellow areas of the US that had new double crop insurance opportunities with no real history, but the option to get started with it. And then if you toggle to what's going to happen for 2024, I'll kind of go back and forth. There's some areas that get cropped, but some new areas even pushing further north, like in Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, a little bit drop off in the west, and that's probably partially due to water restrictions. But the area of opportunity, or at least like, come on, farmers in the Midwest, let's do this, is being pushed out there. Will help you with your insurance risk. Granted, you know, no history is going to be a challenge, but the story is the same. There's this push. We need to do this. Well, what crops allow us to double crop? None. Like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Upper Illinois, maybe wheat, maybe canola, but really it's a struggle, especially if you don't have irrigation. So barley is where the tipping point might be to get us a little bit of a jump start. There's also some interest in relay cropping, which is a different, basically you plant the second crop before the first crop is harvested as relay cropping. And that's a little bit of a different animal, but it's another way we can double crop. So we've been working on this at KBS, the Kellogg Biological Station. We're in Southwest Michigan since 2017. And we've been fortunate to have a couple of grants from SARE and continuous funding from AMBA to work on this. And eventually, you saw all my funders on the intro slide. I'll get back to that at the end so we can thank all of them. But there's really been probably at least a dozen funding agencies and organizations that have helped us with our barley work. So I want to make sure and acknowledge everybody that's involved. Winter barley gives us about a 10-day jump start on the second crop. A lot of times we're harvesting barley in the last week of June, whereas with wheat, it's really no earlier than July 10th. And that, in theory, can make a big difference. But we really didn't know when we set out, can we reliably do this? What are the management practices and the other decisions that we need to make in order to make it profitable, both for the barley, successful for the barley, and profitable for the soybeans? So winter barley, typical in Michigan, sort of a progression. Those of you that know me, like one of my goals in life is to see winter barley become a thing across the US. And so I've fallen in love with this crop. It is the most beautiful crop. I can't remember who I was talking about with last night, but why winter barley? Well, most importantly, it's because it's the most beautiful crop. Much, much better looking than wheat. So one thing we learned early on is in sort of evaluating barley varieties through the winter malting barley trial and taking ratings on maturities and so forth, is that varieties diverge in their flowering dates, which those of you that are breeders, is probably not surprising. What we also learned, the flowering dates are kind of on the left three columns, and green is earlier, red is later. And then the same varieties for maturity dates in the last couple columns. Red is later, green is earlier. They don't really line up exactly. And that was informative for us, because if we're looking for a variety to double crop after, we want to get one that's going to be achieving the goals we have for the barley, thinking malt quality if it's going to be malting barley, but then also have it harvested as early as possible. So really, if you can't see it, we have about a week's difference between the earliest maturing barley varieties, some of which actually are some of our better malting quality varieties, and then a week later for some of the other ones. So in 2017, this is kind of what double crop soybeans might look like. 2017 was a dry year, and we just slapped out a plot, like one small plot in a field of soybeans, and then another plot of sorghum Sudan. And it was really dry. I don't have the weather data here, but it was really dry in late 2017. We got about 10 to 15 bushels per acre. Not exciting, but it's soybeans, it's something. And we also learned that our maturity groups that we plant typically in Southern Michigan, 2.4, I don't know if you know soybean maturity groups, but we're kind of in the 2 to 3 range in Southern Michigan. And so we threw out a 2.4. It did okay, it matured in time, later than normal maturing soybeans, but it was okay. 2018 and 19, we embarked on a bigger project where we added different maturity groups. We had different planting rates, and we included irrigation versus no irrigation to really ramp up, like, what do we need to do to see if this works, especially including irrigation. And 2018 actually was a great growing season for double crop soybeans, sort of a few progressions. We had some cover crops in there too. So the picture on the right, you can see where soybeans on the left, it was probably maybe September, maybe August. Soybeans on the left, fallow, and then sorghum Sudan on the right. So you can see we can grow a lot of biomass when we plant early July. This is after frost on the left. Some of the soybeans, or the green strip in the middle, didn't mature in time before the frost. We still harvested them, but they weren't great. And then harvest time, we were harvesting in the snow, because about October 1st, just when you want to harvest things in Michigan, it starts raining and snowing and doesn't stop until June. We figure it out. Okay, so yield-wise, if you can see the numbers, maturity groups along the bottom, and then irrigated in orange, not irrigated in blue, and we really didn't need irrigation in 2018. And we were yielding 35, well, the later maturing ones, 30 to 45 bushels per acre. Sometimes we don't get that much in our full season soybeans if we have a dry year. This was a great year for double crop soybeans, and we really didn't have to do much. We planted them, we sprayed them, we harvested them. That was about it. And to get 40 bushels per acre. The lower maturity groups matured in time. The 2.8 maturity group did not. So 2019 was a different type of year. We had a similar planting timing of, I think I was planting on July 4th. that year. And we didn't quite get as much rain, but still we had reasonable crops, but our stands were a little bit thinner, so forth. On the left-hand side, you can see again, the early maturing beans matured before frost. The later maturing beans still were green at frost. We still harvested them all. Data, irrigation, again, in orange, dryland in blue. Irrigation mattered more in 2019. It was a dry year, yet if you look at the top end yields, we're only about 25, 26 bushels per acre. And so even with the help of irrigation in that particular year, we still weren't able to achieve those really good yields like we had had the previous year. Again, maturity groups kind of track the same type of trajectory. So sort of fast forward, we've done some other trials, mostly just kind of throw a field out here, a plot out here. We have 1,500 acres of land, so we kind of do like some commercial scale farming in and around our research farming. And so we've had years, I think 2020, we had 40 bushels per acre in a 5-acre field. And then a couple other years that I can't remember. 2023, we had a plot where we threw them out, and I think we planted June 29th, and we only got 19.5 bushels per acre for irrigated and 17 for dryland. So not a great year, but we had poor stands, we had short soybeans, some other issues with harvest losses, which I'm going to come back to that as we get to challenges. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit to a different project and then come back to, in the end, a summary. Colleague Manny Singh and his student Tom Seiler worked on just optimizing soybean yield for different planting dates in Michigan. And I'll show you a few data slides of what they learned, specifically focusing on the late planting dates. So first of all, when we consider different maturity groups, the maturity groups are on the bottom, 1, 1.5, all the way up to 3.5 in green, and planted at different times of the year. And you can see different trajectories of success and yield for those different maturity groups. When we planted end of April, which is sort of like an ideal time to plant soybeans, the later maturity groups did much better. When we plant at the end of June, which is more typical of like a double crop scenario, our late maturity groups did worse, which is consistent with the data I showed you from the previous trial. An interesting thing to look at is actually, even though we have different maturity groups, they seem to be sort of plastic in how much time they spend in each growth stage. And so this graph shows how much time each maturity group 1, 2, and 3 spent at early vegetative to reproductive, and end to reproductive stages, and the early planting date on the top down to late planting date on the bottom. You can see generally the later planting date, those soybeans are compressed in how much time they spend at each growing stage. And we also observed that in our trials where we had like a 1.9 maturity group soybean and a 2.8, and if you measured the date of flowering, there really was only like 3 days in between the date of flowering for those pretty wide maturity groups. So they really kind of racing to get to flowering and reproductive stages, which I think is part of the reason why we can see such big variation in yields. Even when we give them water, I think that there's probably some major temperature and other factors that are going into how much really their potential can be. When looking at seeding rates, it's another important factor for yield, especially, but also for another characteristic. But if you look at seeding rates, 50,000 seeds per acre, all the way up to 210,000 seeds per acre, from light blue to dark blue. Planted at the end of April, we don't see a whole lot of difference. And we've seen this in other projects. We can get some really good soybean yields on really low populations. But when you push it out to the end of June, those soybean plants don't have enough time to grow branches and so forth. And so the higher seeding rates help to improve the yield. They also help to improve the plant height, which pushes some of those low pods off the ground and makes them harvestable, because soybean plants that are grown late and have a lot of room, they'll just kind of grow sideways, and then trying to get a harvester under them makes it really challenging. So some summaries I've learned from Michigan. It's not going to be the end. I'm going to show you a little bit of data from Ohio too, from a colleague there. But from Michigan, I think we've learned that moisture is critical, and probably mostly at the time of planting. We need those plants to have moist, the soybeans to have plants right away and get out of the ground, okay? And moisture later during grain fill is also important, but there's not going to be if we don't get them going, we might as well forget about it. The harvest can be really difficult. Wet weather in the late fall, short plants, low pods, all can make harvesting kind of a challenge. Plus, usually farmers and we as researchers and my technicians and so forth are tired, right? And so I want to note that this is not purely an agronomic question. This is a social science question too that we need to be thinking about, whether farmers are willing to go to the extra work to do this, because it can be taxing. And I know of farmer stories that have been double cropping and they said, you know what, it's too much. We're just going to grow cover crops instead. Planting rates are important. We need to push the populations. Luckily, farmers can get usually cheap soybean seed to do double crop plantings, so that's helpful. And then maturity groups on the shorter to mid end of what you're typically growing in your area should be the most successful when double cropping. Timely planting of soybeans immediately after barley can be challenging for farmers. So the other end of challenging for farmers is, I got to get in the field and get this harvested, and then maybe I'm harvesting straw and it's the 4th of July and I want to go on vacation and I also got to plant soybeans, right? And that can be a challenge in addition to getting the harvest done. Fields that have sort of a marginal context, whether they be poor soil or maybe wildlife influenced, which we have a lot of in Michigan, they tend to do incrementally worse when double cropping. And so we found big variations in when we throw them out into a field, those fields that have like wildlife pressure, there's nothing there at the end of the year. Where we don't have wildlife pressure and we have pretty good soil quality, we can get a lot. And then just to finalize this on the financial side, 40 bushels per acre of soybeans at $12 per bushel, which is roughly a price that farmers are getting this year, adds $480 of gross profit. And I calculate about $120 in cost to put that crop out there, including seeds, including planting costs, and including harvesting costs. I don't include weed control because farmers are going to manage weeds regardless of whether there's soybeans there or not. And so, $360 per acre, that's a pretty good boost to a farmer's bottom line if they can get 40 bushels. Ultimately, it also leads to like 10 to 15 bushels is probably the break-even cost. You still have a cover crop out there, and so you basically may get a sort of a free cover crop, although I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Okay, 10 minutes, right? Okay, so from colleague Eric Rieker at Ohio State. I don't know if anybody, Eric, do you work with him a little bit? So he was in Northern Ohio, and he had graciously sent me a few slides before this conference, because I was like, what did you learn in Ohio that I could share with this group? So he sent this, and they basically did a farmer cohort study to look at what was the advantage of double cropping soybeans after barley versus after wheat versus just full crop soybeans. Okay, and they did this with 20 growers or so over 3 years. So typically in those situations, they use the same maturity groups, the same variety, but the first crop was planted in May, second crop in late June, and then the after wheat crop was sometime in early July. So their data are such, year is sort of bracketed here, and then red is the yield of the soybeans in the different years. The first column on the right is after wheat, and then the second column is after barley, and then the third column is after or full season crop. And so you can see in 2018, they gained about 17 bushels per acre for using barley as the first crop versus wheat. That's a big difference. But in 2019 and 2020, they only saw 1 or 3 bushel yield difference comparing wheat to barley. And in all years, the full crop soybean was much better than the double crop soybean. But I would also say in all years, they were able to add profit to their bottom line. So you average all those together and you get something like a 7 bushel per acre advantage to double cropping after barley versus wheat. And just to give you another example, he threw out another couple data slides here of double cropping after, I believe these are after wheat. I should have put more notes in here, but I believe these are other scenarios where they double cropped after wheat, and in other parts of Ohio, they're getting really big yields after wheat, 50 bushels per acre in that study. And then Southern Ohio, 50, 53, 51 bushels per acre. So they're doing really well on double cropping, and as hopefully we can use barley to push it further north. So briefly, other options for double crops after barley include these. Sorghum for silage, either forage sorghum or sorghum sedan. Both do really well, planted early July. Obviously, that's only for livestock farmers or if you have a livestock farm market, but you can grow a lot of feed. In some years, we can grow as much feed from a double crop sorghum crop as we can for a whole season of alfalfa, which quality to quality, it's not quite the same, but biomass, it matters. Grain sorghum in our area can be completed, early maturating ones. We have farmers growing for birdseed markets. Sunflowers, people love sunflowers, and we don't grow sunflowers much in Michigan, but if we can put them out there, the people flock to them. Oh, it's beautiful. Dry beans, yeah, those of you that have sunflowers are probably like, what? The same thing for canola. They're like, what is that? Dry beans can be done, and then cover crops for just grazing or silage as well. And I wanted to add in here, I think some other things that I haven't tried that I want to try include spring canola. I want to try planting spring canola around July 1st and see what it does, because I know reseeded canola that gets started like later in July almost makes it to maturity again. And then buckwheat is another one that I think we could try and potentially be successful with, depending on a farmer's markets. So to kind of wrap this up, I think that now we kind of know that we can be successful with double cropping. There's some management tweaks that we know are critical to the success: moisture, making sure you have decent soil, and that the deer don't eat them all. But I think that there's still some bigger questions to answer when we're thinking about this. So, and I've listed them here. So what is the cost to double cropping? Okay. And I think a lot of these we legitimately don't know. Is there a soil health cost? We know that getting winter cereals into our Midwest crop rotations helps boost like next corn yields. But what happens if we start adding in soybeans 2 out of 3 years? What happens to the next corn yield? What happens to the soybean pest pressure? What happens if we cover crop instead, right? Instead of doing the double crop or fallow? I think that's an important question, both when we consider soil health, but I didn't put in here but also to sort of water quality and other initiatives that we're trying to improve with getting winter cereals onto the landscape. Also, I mentioned the farmer fatigue and the social questions that go into this, because that's real. I think probably more than we think about as researchers, because it is challenging there's an easiness to the simplicity of corn and soybean farming. And when we start adding another crop, that does help spread out the workload, but it also prevents the break times. And when those break times get slimmer and slimmer, that becomes a fatigue issue for farmers. And then, of course, there's also this changing climate that we have. The changing climate is why we can't grow spring barley in a lot of the Midwest anymore, right? I think we used to be able to grow decent spring barley, but now it just gets too hot and humid and dry too fast. But then if we're double cropping and we have sort of pretty rapid changes in our climate and weather, how does our research need to keep up with that and continue to introduce the best scenarios for success? And then also, are there more innovative relay cropping techniques that could be extra competitive in this space? We haven't tried too much relay cropping, but I know other farmers have, and with real marginal success. And some farmers will claim they have great yields, and some farmers claim that they don't, and really nothing does well. So I think there's opportunities for more research there. Okay, and that's you can see all of the funding agencies that I probably forgot somebody. But thank you to all of you that have been involved in helping fund. I know some of you are here, and do we have time for questions? Okay.
What questions do we have for Brooke?
I just want to say, if you have a seat next to you, raise your hand. Got these seats next to you, that these people next to you.
Nicholas, I think in the back.
Okay, so, I mean, I'm all on board with this. I also love it. But I'm concerned about, I want to know what your thoughts are on this. I mean, I think the big problem is, I mean, you saw those full system meetings. There's one crop, it's easy to get in, and you're getting a significant amount more, and you probably have to drive it 10 miles down the road to unload it, give or take. What are you gonna do with the barley, right? I mean, is there a place to take it, and it's this extra thing you have to do, and that, I just, my concern is that the logistics and the infrastructure just aren't there, and I don't see, I feel like I'm not seeing a trend in that infrastructure getting better. It seems to be getting worse. It seems like we're converging on, we only have to crop corn and soybeans. And so I just want to know, what are your thoughts on that? How do we do that?
So the question is, the markets aren't there yet, and there's not really a lot of evidence that the markets for Midwestern malt, winter barley or malt barley in general are going to emerge, or seems to be emerging, and what do we do about that? Well, I don't know. To be honest, you're right. We don't have much market in Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. We have some craft maltsters that are buying some barley. We don't have any mass market, right? So the markets are slim currently. Is that a current impediment? Yes. Is that a long-term impediment? I don't think so, because I think I'm hearing from the breeders in the room that winter barley malt quality was kind of an afterthought for generations, and a lot of you are giving it attention now. And while what I understand is we're not quite to the best spring barley, we're getting close with some of the winter barley varieties that we have. So once the quality is there, and if farmers want to grow it, and the yields are there, I don't know how to make, magic markets and sort of like this whole supply chain work to add winter barley into the whole scheme of things, but I don't know. I'm willing to help try, do my part, and hopefully you will too, Nick, and maybe things will emerge somehow, some way. And maybe we'll need it, right? Maybe we'll have more drought years and we absolutely need it.
What's the specs that you're getting? You guys doing the protein?
Yeah.
All you up this way.
I don't have any slides handy to show you, but we do all the grain quality for malt specs, and then some years we'll do malt quality. And so we're typically in the protein range that you want to be, the 10-11%. Varieties matter. Management by variety interactions matter, that. And then malt quality, I think we suffer some of the same challenges that have been brought up. Pre-harvest sprout might be just an issue of we have to harvest all of our plots at the same time. It's the ones that matured a week earlier, but sprout is an issue. Don, not too much of an issue. I think that's been brought up there earlier. We haven't seen too much. Don, beta glucans and winter barley can be an issue, and then I always hear malt extracts is brutal, but I've seen malt extract numbers in the 82 plus range for some varieties in a lot of, I've never seen 83. I've also seen 79, right? So it can vary. A lot of times we're achieving AMBA malt quality guidelines.
Or maybe one more to answer the question?
Yeah, I was curious. So you did a nice, stack up the envelope, math on the economics of the double crop of soybean, but you didn't talk about barley side. So I was curious if you thought a little bit about that. So the net value of both the winter barley and.
Yeah, that's a great question. It all depends on how much you can sell the barley for. Somebody yesterday said, was it you, Nick, that said feed barley was 250 or something like that? So you're not gonna make any money on barley at 250, right? The cost of growing barley right now, this last year, it's similar to wheat. And I believe our costs are in the $300 and something per acre. And so if we can achieve the 80 to 100 bushels per acre of barley and get, upwards of the wheat, let's say we get wheat price for barley, which this past year was around $8 a bushel, but it's sliding a lot. I think we can easily make money. And then if you have a straw market and if you have a double crop market, you can do probably better than corn in a lot of years. But if you get 250 per bushel for your barley, then yeah. One more, Ryan or Mitch? Maybe-
Mitch comes up before Ryan, but you're gonna just have to find Ryan later, so we can keep going. But Mitch, I'll sneak in.
Barley industry goes. I see us always focusing on the malt side of barley. And I think, I'm wondering if some of the research you get, more pointed towards food values as well as feed values. I mean, it's an overall picture of what that barley crop is actually doing.
Yeah,
And it's not just focused on the malt.
that's a great point. Maybe what we can do is figure out if there's other quality metrics that we need to be measuring to be valuable for the food market. I'll take a note of that. Talk to some people and see if that might, what we can come up with. That would be pretty easy just to measure for.